The next thing on our program is a presentation by Jack Morlock, who's the current camp director for 18 years.
Yep, 18.
He's going to be around for a couple more years, so that's good. I'm very sure that as people drove down, it was like a time warp. That Jack has kept this place pristine, and how we all remember it and love it. We're just so grateful for his good work. So with that, Jack, take it away.
Well, thank you, and welcome to Shady Trails. It's so nice to see everybody here. This is a really special place. I'm sure all of you know that, or you probably wouldn't be here. I'm convinced that there is a magic to Shady Trails. You start out with this big 26-acre pot. You add some staff to it, and it starts to churn up a little bit. And then you add some programming to it, and you stir it up a little bit more, and it starts to bubble even more. And in our case now, we add the kids. And once you throw the kids in there and you stir it up, you just let things happen. And it's magical what happens. I don't think things have really changed. I wasn't here in the 40s, 50s, 60s, as some of you were, but I'm sure it was about the same. I'm sure that those that were campers came here scared and not quite knowing what was going to happen. And I'm sure that when they left, they felt blessed. And same thing happens today. This is just a wonderful place. And Mr. Clancy's legacy lives on, stronger than ever. I don't think Mr. Clancy ever had any idea of how much impact his camp was going to have on the lives of so many people. The impact on the kids' lives today.
Day camp for kids 5 to 14 years old.
Okay.
They're dropped off at 9 o'clock and picked up at 4. And then we have a program with the school, Northport School, their summer school program, where if the kids attend summer school in the morning, they get on the bus drops them off at 11:45, they have lunch and spend the afternoon here at camp. We're considered by a lot of people as the best day camp in northern Michigan. When you look at our programming is off the wall. Art, nature, photography, high ropes course, rec field, archery, swimming, canoeing, kayaking, dance, performing arts. We have programming that typical day camps dream of. I think it was 222 different kids this summer. We're only open a month. And out of those 222, I believe 70 were brand new. So that bodes well for the future. We keep them very, very busy. There's 4 sessions each day. They get started at 9:30 every morning, and they finish up about 3.
And we're going to keep it going. It's going to continue. We're very fortunate. Laura Dybel, the owner of the camp, is totally committed to this place. Totally. It's going to keep going on for years and years and years. And all of you are always welcome back to Shady Trails. Every week, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 cars come down, and it's going to be an ex-camper or an ex-staff member from the speech camp. And they get out, they come in, they walk around, sometimes they cry, but they all come back for some reason. It draws them back. And I think that's the magic of this place. It keeps drawing people back into it.
I had been down here earlier in the day and had gone home. For some reason, I decided to come back. And I had just pulled in the driveway, and a car pulled in the back of me. And this lady got out, and her husband and her father were in the car. She said, "My father attended camp here." Well, he attended camp, not here. He was a member of the 1932 class. And the oldest picture I have is 1932. And I showed it to him, and he said, "That's me." And, you know, he struggled emotionally for a few minutes. And I didn't have the heart to tell him, this isn't where you were. You know, I mean, he saw the island, and he was convinced that he was at Shady Trails. And I almost goofed up because he said, "When did they take the second story off the building?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't know when they did that." I had a couple come down. They were walking around, and I asked them if I could help them. And they said, "Well, I just brought my brother down to revisit the camp." I said, "Where's your brother?" And she had a box.
Stop by anytime. You're always welcome to come by, and always glad to have you. And even if no one's here, you're welcome to come down and walk around and just experience it. It's a special place, and love to have you come back.
Towards the end of the '62 season, there was some visitor from the University of Michigan who was obviously a bigwig. Don't know who. At the breakfast the morning before he left, after having been here for several days, he stood up. He was at the Clancy's table. And he turned around and he said, for a couple of sentences, that it was very nice to be here. It was a very pleasant place. And wasn't it nice to have a place for these, quote, poor handicapped children? Okay, Mr. Clancy was very cool about it, said thank you very much. Turned to Mrs. Clancy, she dismissed the room, and that was it. For lunch, 3.5 hours later, everybody came in, sat down, bong, 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 bong. Noise level drops. From the door over there, which was the room which was the staff offices, came a U-clubber. If you've ever been to a nightclub or something and you've seen people trying to sell cigarettes, he had on some of the props from the Niffler. He had on the tray, a string around his neck, dark glasses, a hat, cane. And he came out, "Help for the handicapped, help for the handicapped." The man got a standing ovation.
And my name is Dave Field. I am from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I was on the camp staff from 1974 to 1973. That was my announcement. Here's my round robin. I was in the neophyte cabin as an intern. I was in the Wolverine cabin with my good friend Ash Bishop, and the cave cabin as a major therapist. I was then appointed to be the assistant director, and son of a gun, somebody asked me to be the director. And so I was the director from 1970 to 1974. And I was fortunate enough, and I promised myself I wouldn't do this. I was fortunate enough to be here with John Clancy. Okay, and the impact that the camp and Mr. Clancy had on me is beyond my ability to describe. It changed my whole life. At the end of the summer, my intern year, I heard that Mr. Clancy met with people to find out what they thought of the summer. And that he also, during this talk, invited people back, well, you get the idea. So I had heard some of the counselors and interns had been in for their meeting, and some of them were asked back, and others were not. And I wanted to be asked back more desperately than I wanted anything up to in my life at that time. Keep in mind, I was only 22. So what desperate things could you want? But that I wanted really desperately. So I went in, talked to Mr. Clancy. We sat down in the office right over there, and we talked about things that happened, funny things. We talked about serious things. And he said to me, "What are your plans for the future?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go to the University of Michigan. I'm going to finish my master's degree." And he got up and left. And I thought, well, I must have said something wrong. I wonder where he's going and what he's going to do. Well, he came back with a tray, and on that tray were 2 cups of coffee, a bowl of sugar, and a creamer. Back the very first week of camp, right out here on this patio, I was sitting here drinking my coffee, sort of pale brown, and he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, that's my coffee." And he said, "Well," he said, "I challenge you to go black all summer long. And if you do, you will never go back to cream and sugar again. You accept that challenge?" And of course I was scared to death of him, so I said, "Sure, whatever you say. That's fine with me." So I did it. I drank coffee black all summer long. So he sat there, took his coffee, looked at me, said, "Well?" My first impulse was to drink it black and just say, "Oh, yes, Mr. Clancy, I've learned to love it. I hope you're so proud of me." But I didn't. I heaped the sugar in, and I heaped the milk in, and I slugged this stuff down and said, "Ah." And he said, "Well, Mr. Field, it looks like you're going to have to come back another couple of summers in order to learn how to drink it black." And that's the way I was invited back to camp. John N. Clancy was born in Traverse City. At the age of 4, he used to go for rides with the milkman. Maybe Priscilla knows this story. He liked the milkman, and he enjoyed being with him. One day, when he stopped to pick up Mr. Clancy, pick up little John, the milkman yelled, "Hurry up, you little stuttering son of a bitch." And it was at that point that Mr. Clancy realized that what he did with his speech was called stuttering. He struggled with his stuttering all through school years, including Notre Dame. He also struggled with it as an accountant. And finally, after years of trying to overcome his problem, he discovered some keys that became his mantra for overcoming stuttering. First of all, you had to become self-confident. You had to understand that stuttering did not define who you were, it didn't stand in your way, and you could still be anything you wanted to be despite that. The other thing that he learned is that you had to have a better self-image. And so with these 2 principles in mind, he decided to do something to help others. He and Grace, his wife, thought, if we can find a place where we can change the environment that negatively influences the way people who stutter think about themselves, we can change the way they speak and the way they react to life. It'll give them the opportunity to learn to be fluent. So they opened Shady Trails. They bought the property about 2 miles down the road from here that you've heard about from Judy Custer. It had on the property, it had a 2-story hotel, and it had about 4 cabins, and they were the kind of cabins that had canvas sides and stuff. And the first year he had 4 campers. Second year he had 6. The third year he had 15. And it kept growing and growing and growing. All the activities took place around this hotel and these little cabins. After a while, Mr. Clancy realized that he wasn't going to fit in this place anymore. So he bought this property in 1947. Built the buildings, opened the camp, and after only 2 years, he realized he couldn't do it alone. He had to have financial and institutional support in order to make this thing work. He was already in contact with and in an association with University of Michigan Speech Clinic. Dr. Harlan Bloomer, who was the director, had been on the staff for many years and was very supportive. And with his influence, they approached the Kresge Foundation who bought the camp from him and then gifted it to the University of Michigan, with the stipulation that John Clancy stay on as the director. But the University of Michigan, being the University of Michigan, made the stipulation that he had to get a master's degree in speech pathology, which he did, and then he was named assistant director to the clinic. The Clancy philosophy is the backbone, was the backbone of Shady Trails. I can still remember my opening orientation. We sat there and looked at him, and he said, "You will, for the summer, give up your personal prerogative for the good of the group." I had no idea what that meant. I didn't even know what the word prerogative meant. But I was soon to find out exactly what that meant. For Clancy, it meant that everything you did revolved around the campers. Their achievement of their goals, increasing their self-confidence, improving their self-image, the keys that he had discovered to overcoming speech problems. Well, let me say right here, the therapy was almost irrelevant. I know that's going to shock many of the therapists among you. We came with whatever therapy experience we had, and that's what we did for therapy. It changed over the years. So it wasn't the therapy that changed the kids. In fact, when I first got here, I thought, what is this blending and phrasing stuff? I've never heard of anything like this. How's that supposed to help somebody who stutters? I mean, I kind of got the idea, but come on. But I soon realized it was irrelevant. We did blending and phrasing and vowel prolongation and light contact and all of those things that were part of Shady Trails. But what really was the key was the environment. It was an environment of acceptance. It was an environment of lack of negative response, and that's what we had to invest in. If we invested in that, if we invested in those two principles, it meant you were going to have a wonderful summer. If you resisted those principles and resisted it, you were going to have the summer from hell, and you would probably never want to come back. You were totally responsible for kids entrusted to your care 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The speech staff learned that they weren't off duty when they were done giving speech therapy. The athletic staff learned that they weren't just here to teach kids sports skills, make sure they brushed their teeth, and play with the kids during free time. We were on duty 24 hours a day. Whenever we were with the kids, it was our responsibility to further their acceptance of themselves, their self-confidence, and their self-image. If you bought into this, you were able to take the grueling hours we spent during these summers. If you bought into it, and in the era that I was here first, and you were a woman, you got to live with 19 other women in a building with 2 toilets, 2 sinks, and 1 shower. And you were able to survive. It meant that you could manage with 1 out night a week, beginning at 10 o'clock. You spent half of that at the laundry mat, not the laundromat, the laundry mat, still on the window, washing your clothes, and the other half, well, we won't talk about the other half, but you still had to be here before the morning bell stopped ringing. Mr. Clancy believed that the dining room was the heart of the camp program. Miss Curtis was on the staff of the old camp, and she told us many stories about how programs here were developed. And she said she went to Mr. Clancy and she said, "You know, John, you've got a golden opportunity here. We shouldn't just eat and run. We should eat and talk. This is the time when you can get together and build relationships in a way that's very unique. 3 times a day. That's about 3 hours out of this kid's day, and we can really make inroads. And that's what they did. They decided that the campers were going to eat at family style, with a male and a female staff member at each table, family, and they were going to interact. They were going to have meal talk, they were going to have how's your day going, and they were going to have an opportunity to practice what they were using in speech class. They were also going to have an opportunity to learn manners and build self-confidence in that way. The groupings were rotated so that each camper got to sit with as many different people during the 8 weeks they were here as possible. 2 weeks with their own cabin, 2 weeks with the two cabins in their division, 2 weeks with one camper from PA, one camper from every other cabin in the U Club, and finally they went back to being with their own kids. After the tables were cleared, Mr. Clancy would rise from his chair and in his booming voice would ask, "Are there any announcements?" Then one by one the campers would raise their hands and they would give various announcements. One of the most popular being,
Yes, the water in the bay is cold today.
thank you.
Sorry.
They also sometimes explained exactly what they were working on in speech class. They talked about what they were doing on the athletic field. One night, I was sitting at a square table over there, and with me were Mr. Ashley Bishop, Mr. Timothy Carter, Mr. Woodrow Fox, Mr. Michael Clark, Miss Carolee Anderson, and Miss Diana Morgan. We had just shown a horror film to the kids right here in the lodge. And Tim and Ash were discussing how to make sure that these little kids especially weren't freaked out. So the discussion turned to, who's your favorite monster? Well, we all kind of shared, and I shared that who scared me the most was the mummy. Really scared of the mummy. So at that point, Kate and I don't remember how many of our kids, were living up on the hill. So in order to get to the top of the hill, you had to go through the woods, across the athletic field, and up this kind of winding path, which now is stairs to our residence. Carolee and Mike Clark decided they would walk with me. I figured, okay, I know where they're going. And so we walked across the athletic field and we walked up the stairs, and up the hill, this sandy, sandy hill. Halfway up the hill, a floodlight went on, and at the top of the hill stood the mummy. All 6'5" of the mummy. I flipped over backwards, landed on top of Carolee, who fell on top of Mike. I was lying on the ground going, oh, oh, oh. Carolee was choking me, yelling, you planned this, you planned this. No, I didn't plan this. That gentleman there planned it, that gentleman there planned it, and Woodrow Fox planned it. They wrapped Woody Fox, who was this muscular 6'5" guy, wrapped in toilet paper at the top of the hill. Yes, we did have fun with each other. Well, Dr. Prinz was on the staff from 1960 to 1969, and he followed Mr. Clancy as director. Dave, all of us here today probably knew, except with the exception maybe Priscilla and her family, knew Mr. Clancy best. And this is what he wrote about Mr. Clancy in Dave's book, Going Home. Camp is a large family, mainly of new members, assembled overnight. All those possibilities, all those needs, wants, all those aspirations thrown together in the blink of an eye. It could bring out the best or the worst in people. How could it work? Would it work? But Clancy knew it would. He was the father, all 5'6" of him, and he ruled like a benevolent monarch. Clancy did it, and this is important, with goodwill, good judgment, and good humor. Clancy loved to laugh. He liked people, found merit when there was merit to be found. He was direct, practiced the art of plain talk. He was fair. knew better than to play favorites. He accepted bad news, didn't shoot the messenger. He used his temper, didn't lose it. Clancy was, as Dean Acheson said of President Truman, free of the greatest vice in a leader. His ego never came between him and his job. By the early 60s, Clancy and his wife Grace, who had served the camp as camp mother since its inception, were both in poor health. They retired following the 1964 camp season. Dr. Prinz was named the director. He served for 5 years following Mr. Clancy's retirement. He ran the camp in the spirit of its founder. I was on the staff under his direction during that time, and I was amazed at how he was able to keep the spirit of Shady Trails and the spirit of Clancy intact. For me, at least, it seemed as if Clancy was still among us. Toward the middle of the summer of 1969, Dave called me into his office. He said, "Sit down. I have something to tell you." I sat down. He said, "I have decided to take a position at the University of Washington. I'll be leaving the university on September 1st. Well, I was in total shock. So I asked him, "Who's going to be the next director?" He smiled and he said, "Well, I've been talking to Dr. Bloomer, and I've been in touch with Mr. Clancy, and I have recommended that you become the director." Blah, 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 blah. So I said, "I can't do this." I said, I can't do this. And he said, "Yes, you can. Clancy thinks you can." So with those thoughts in mind, I said, "Let me talk to Katie." And I went up and talked to Katie, and Katie said, "It's up to you, it's your decision." So I decided, and I said yes. I was humbled and honored to have followed Clancy and Dave Prinz as the director of Shady Trails and to carry on Mr. Clancy's tradition. It was not always easy. I was only 27 years old. I hadn't finished my PhD. And many of the men back in the university had been my teachers only a few years before. In the absence of Dr. Prinz and Mr. Clancy, the pressure on me to change the camp program from a therapy-based program to a research-based program that did a little therapy on the side was pretty intense. I resisted it with the help of Mr. Carter and with the help of Colonel Leschewski, who was the money man at the University of Michigan. We pushed back, but eventually that became a little bit too difficult. I did my best to preserve Clancy's vision that all things were done for the benefit of the campers and nothing was done to detract from that. And I was always asking myself, as Dr. Prinz had advised me, what will Clancy do? Clancy had established self-sacrifice as the bedrock of the camp's welfare. Personal life and family life had to come second. Clancy had always done it that way, and both Dave and I followed in those footsteps. Dave confided in me that part of his reason for leaving the camp was because it was becoming too big a burden on his wife and family. I understood that because it was becoming a burden on this little lady over here, because not only was she serving as camp mother, she also was taking care of our kids, because I was here, there, from 6 in the morning until almost midnight every day. I did go home once in a while during rest period, but then I fell promptly asleep. So, with my departure from Shady Trails, the direct line of succession from John Clancy was at an end. The next director would have no personal contact with this wonderful man or with Dr. Prinz. The direction the camp would take after I left, only time would tell. Thank you. Okay, and now I'm going to introduce Priscilla Massey, who's going to give some comments from the Clancy family.
And I wanted to thank them for coming. I also wanted to thank Judy, wherever you are. Amazing. You had me almost in tears so many times today, and all the work you've done. And you we're not a camper or a counselor here, and the devotion that you have put to that website into keeping this legacy alive is just amazing. All of you, thank you for keeping the legacy alive. Tim, your work and your work on the reunion gym, everyone's just done such a wonderful time, and thank you for welcoming us. It's wonderful. It's a step back in time. I have a few memories that I've written down, and all I could say is if only John and Grace could see all of you at this reunion at Shady Trails, they would be proud of each and every one of you, and they would be in tears right now. It's just so wonderful what you've done with your lives since you were little boys and you've left the camp and you've turned into men, and your families and your work and everything that you've done. It's just been so amazing, and that they had just a little bit to do with it would just amaze them. And I know they're here because we all can feel it at times, and I know that. I come from a family of 7 children. I was the daughter of their oldest daughter. They had 2 daughters. They had Marie and Pat, and Marie and Pat both worked at the camp since they were little, of course, growing up. They were at the old camp and they were at the new. And I happened to be number 5 on the list of 7 children in the family. I was the only redhead in the family. And as a grandchild, I had the privilege of not only living with them in Ann Arbor, but I got to come up here and stay with them at camp, at the end of camp in 61 and 62. So I would sit on the other side of that table in one of these chairs with them and chew with my mouth closed and everything else. But it was wonderful. I would go to the library. I, of course, was not allowed to be a part of being with any of the campers or anything, so I was either swimming or at the library or with Grandma or something like that. But my mother, Marie, had considered me a difficult child and thought I should go, I think, with my grandparents. That's all my theory on it. She could never remember quite why I was sent away out of all of them. But my first grade report card said, Priscilla Fowles rules when she wants to. She sent me to John Clancy. But, you know, they spoiled this redhead. John and Grace spoiled me. I never heard my grandparents yell or fight ever. I never heard them raise their voice, except when they were here in the dining room kind of thing. But they were just so quiet and so happy, and just, you know, they were just lovely. I enjoyed helping Grace cook. I would help her squeeze. We used to, in Ann Arbor, we'd had fresh orange juice every day, and I'd help her squeeze the fresh orange juice for our breakfasts and peel carrots or make pies. And I'd follow her around and help her with chores and do ironing and things like that. But I really loved just being with her. Now, with John, there was always music in the house. There was always music. And he loved every kind. He loved big bands. He loved symphonies. He loved the blues. And of course, he loved the Clancy brothers. So we had it all. We had the Irish music going too. But I remember a story my mother told me when she was 16. My grandfather, John, got the whole family together, and they took the train and they went to Chicago, and they stayed at the Palmer House. And she said, we got to hear Billie Holiday sing the blues. So he really did love music, and I think that, you know, it's an important part of this program here, and I think that was always part of it. And these songs that are in the songbooks, I know all these songs, and I wasn't part of the camp, but I could sing them all by heart right now because my mother knew all those songs. So I grew up with McNamara and everybody else, okay? And Tennessee Toodly-Doo. But it was wonderful. We were heading out to the Northport Lighthouse, which we had done for several years. We were storytellers, and I'm a historian, and I do historic cooking, and I do it in costume and things like this. And we were doing a fundraiser out at the Northport Lighthouse. And we were driving up that Friday night, and all the lawn, this is in 1995, July 25th, or not that day, it was the Friday before. And I said, Larry, the lawn isn't mowed. Camp starts in a couple days. What is going, or it should be going right now. And so we get out there, you know, it was night. We were staying with folks out at the point, and we had to work all the next day. And so I said, I got to go to camp on Sunday. I got to find out what's going on. I have to know. So we get to camp on Sunday on July 25th, and I get to the house that they lived in, and Joanne, who I had only met once, she lives in Portage, the same place that my mother lived, and Joanne's packing her car, and her husband's putting a surfboard or something on the roof. I go, what are you guys doing leaving? What's going on? And she said, they sold the camp. And I said, wait. She said, yeah, we moved up here a couple of weeks ago, and they've sold the camp, and they told us to get out of here. And I said, well, who sold the camp? And they said, the University of Michigan. And I said, no, they can't sell the camp. How can they do this? My mother's on the board of Shady Trails, University of Michigan Shady Trails. No, this has got to be wrong. No, what's going on? And she said, they're selling the camp, and you better start getting whatever you can save because they're getting rid of everything. And thank God we had a truck, and I had my historian husband, and we did some dumpster diving that day, and you've seen some of the things that we got. They were stripping the camp of everything and making it so it was nondescript. Joanne had she obviously had moved up with her husband that summer to be the director and was not told of this. None of us were told of this. And it was really a shock. I was just stunned. I wanted to save everything from the camp, and I was just packing the truck with everything. We had a covered camper, and I'm just finding every little nook and cranny and everything I could find. And we did what we could. When I got home that night, we had our drive down to Allegan. We live in the Allegan Forest. I called my mother, and I said, did you know about this? Now, my mother had, by this time, lost 2 sons. And I never saw my mother cry. She was a tough, tough Irish woman. She's John Clancy's oldest daughter. And she bawled and cried and cried and bawled. Did not know a thing about it. We were never informed of the public meetings that the university's public meetings the University of Michigan said they had, and they still say they had, but we were not informed of them. People in the Leelanau Peninsula that all love this camp and these campers.
And you do.
They do. They do. I mean, I wore my shirt around Northport today, and they're just like, oh, Shady Trail. Yeah, I'm John Clancy's granddaughter. And you're John Clancy. I mean, they know. Everyone loved this. They would have been at these meetings. There were no public meetings. I happened to be staying with Dick Schuster. Dick is a judge at the time and also a University of Michigan graduate, and he fought U of M for this. He fought to try and keep it open, and he had married over 30 couples in this lodge. They've had the property since '55 out there, and people would ask Dick to marry him, and so he's married people all over this peninsula, and he had a stake in it, but you can't fight U of M. So things go like that. That's just the way they go. And there was nothing we could do, but all of you, to this day, today and the joy that you bring me of keeping the legacy of Shady Trails alive. We've got to keep it going. And no, the children can't come here anymore, but we can keep it alive and keep the legacy alive and work at that. The university told my mother that John and Grace's name would go on the University of Michigan's aphasia clinic because they had sold the camp. At the time, we didn't know it was going to Tim Allen, but that's who bought it. And they said they were gonna start an endowment in the Clancy's name for speech pathologists. The last time I checked, they never did start an endowment, and I never bothered going to see if they fulfilled the other promise of putting their name on the clinic or not. It's very sad. But in closing, our family with 7 kids, we had a game and a tradition, and I thought it was just our family until I started reading the website. And we played it nearly every day. We really did at the dinner table, and dinner was exactly how it is here. And every one of us got to talk. The 17-year-old got to talk, the 6-year-old got to talk. You all got 5 minutes at least to talk at the dinner table, and that all went around and we all got it. Of course, I was gone for about 10. I was the jabberjaw of them all. But we had this wonderful game, and we'd have these leftovers after dessert, you know, like you'd have the couple pieces of pie or a couple pieces of cake or something like that, and everybody wanted it, and you'd think the older kids would get it. And no, that's not the way it went. You know what we played?
Wang Ho.
Wang Ho! Wang Ho! I cannot believe Wang Ho came from camp. We wanged Ho all my life. We wanged Ho who had to change the tire on the car if it went flat. We wanged Ho who had to clean the bathroom. We wanged Ho everything. And I said, who ever came up? But I did find out that Bilto was who came up with Wang Ho. But I didn't find this out until a little bit later when my mother was still alive and I was asking her, and she had told me it was Bilto. But I had no idea it came from camp. And I'd tell all my friends, they go, you know, they'd come to dinner, or you'd invite a friend over and you'd have extra cake, and they go, Wang Ho. I said, just get your hand out there. Just get some figures out there. You might win. And they'd win, you know, and we're all like, the guest won the pie, you know. But Wang Ho was the big game in our family, yeah. It was everything. Because how do you divide between 7 and you've got these 5 boys and 2 girls? It had to be Wang Ho for everything, you know. It was just hilarious. But, you know, who's going to sweep out the house? Who's going to sweep out the cabin? We had a place on Lake Michigan the year I was born. My parents bought a place. They loved the lake so much. My mother had it in her blood. She was up here since she was born, practically. So she really did love it. But I was so surprised to find that that was actually a camp thing. But that's really all my memories that I can really think to share with all of you. And thank you for sharing all your memories with me and keeping the legacy alive and being a part of this. You have just, I'm walking around just so happy, and I have chills. I got them right now. You just all make me so happy and so wonderful and so proud. And thank you for welcoming all of us here to this reunion. I hope I can be involved in all of them, because I just think it's wonderful. I really do, and I love you all for it. Thank you.